Good stuff.
Right. So I'm going to start. So in chapter 9, we want to combine the IS, LM, and PC. So IS was the goods and services market. LM was the financial market. Now we're introducing the Philip curves where we didn't discuss it before, and we're trying to link it because it will help us to do analysis of shocks to the economy in terms of business cycle and what are the implications of it. For example, if you have an oil shock, so if you have an oil shock, how do you interpret it in the short run and how do you interpret it in the long run? Those are important things which you really actually do need to know for your exam. That how does, if you have in chapter 9, the very important thing you need to understand is the oil shock thing and what are the implications when you are thinking about the short run, when you are thinking about the long run, in the medium run, in terms of the in terms of natural unemployment, employment itself, and the price level. So both in the short run and the medium run. So okay, so I even wrote message to self, please be as frugal as possible. The reason being, I wanted to be able to remember that I shouldn't write too much. Okay, so I see people coming to class. Everybody's interested in coming through. Okay, so we first look, we'll develop the ISLM and PC model, look at the dynamic of the adjustment of output and inflation, look at the dynamic effect of fiscal policy consolidation, i.e. we look this in chapter 5. I need you to read in chapter 5 what are the fiscal policy consolidation. When you talk about fiscal policy consolidation, we are talking about reduction of budget deficit. And you need to understand in the short run, what are we saying? In the medium run, in this chapter, we'll discuss it. So we will see the contrast. You need to be able to have the contrast between the short run fiscal policy reduction, fiscal deficit reduction, and in the medium run fiscal reduction. Right. Then this is very important, as I say again, look at the dynamic effect of an increase in the price of oil. Don't come to the exam if you don't know that, right? So, okay. So in chapter 6, we show that our output is given by this equation where you have consumption is a function of your disposable income, your investment, and then here we now have our real interest rate plus some risky premium and plus government spending. So in the short run, output is determined by demand, consumption depend on disposable income, and investment depend on output, real borrowing rate, where real borrowing rate is nothing else but it's merely your really policy, which is your real interest rate plus the risky premium. Government spending, we're still assuming it to be exogenous in this scenario, so the equation should look like this, right? The IS then is still downward sloping as normal. We have the policy rate on the y-axis and the output on the horizontal axis. So the lower is the policy rate, given the horizontal LM curve, the higher the equilibrium output. Now remember, you have the horizontal LM. Under what scenario do you have a horizontal LM curve? Is it when you are having issues like liquidity trap or what? You need to remember that, right? Okay, so you have the IS like this, and then you have your LM like that. You should remember that, right? So the mechanism behind this is should now be clear that if you lower the interest rate, your investment goes up. If you increase your investment, your demand goes up and your output goes up. And if your output goes up, your income increases, your consumption increases, and if consumption increases, your investment increases, and that's a multiplier effect, right? In chapter 8, I derived the relationship between unemployment and inflation, and that was a Philip curve, right? So you're saying that the change of the inflation minus expected inflation is given by a deviation of your output gap, right? Now I need to be able to link this with this one with the IS. Now the linkage, how does the linkage come about? So I have that I need to derive this relationship to get the relationship where changes in inflation and output. So if your output increases, changes in inflation will increase. Right, so the second graph shows that the higher output lead to a larger change in inflation. But how do we get there? When unemployment rate is lower, the natural rate inflation turn out to be higher than expected. If unemployment is higher than the natural rate, inflation turn out to be lower than expected. So given then we have this as our IS, we will need to rewrite the PC in terms of output and not unemployment. So remember that your unemployment rate is the number of unemployed over the labor force, but unemployed is labor force less employed, which is N. So you divide that, you get this. Then recall that we say that output is equal to employment, assuming that we are not considering A, which is productivity. Then we can rewrite this and plug back into our equation. So we get that at optimal, our natural unemployment, YN, is equal to L1 minus N. If we represent the deviation of the employment from its natural level, we obtain the following. So from this equation, I am going to say Y, I'm going to say Y minus this. So Y, subtract Y from both sides. So if you're gonna take this and that, so you're getting that Y, the deviation is equal to minus LU minus UN. So what does it mean? It means if U is equal, if your unemployment is equal to natural rate of unemployment, it means your output is equal to your potential output, and there is no gap. If current unemployment is greater than natural rate, then you have that your output is less than your potential. In this scenario, your economic is in recession. If unemployment is less than natural, then it means that this economic is overheating. So remember that. So we start with the Okun's law. Now we can actually use this relationship we just derived here. Yeah.
I wanted to ask, is it important for us to understand the derivation? So the formulas you were basically discussing is important, or it's sufficient, or it suffices to know the end product and how it then comes apart, but not the nitty-gritties of how the derivation happens?
I can't comment on derivation. Go read. Tomorrow I will tell you what you need to know on calculation. But I think you do need to understand what is happening.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Thanks.
so please, I don't think it's complex. But anyway, I don't know. It depends on how allergic you are to mathematics, but it's fine. Okay, so recall that Yn is equal to this, i.e. from here, Yn minus that is equal to that, which means I can actually write Un minus that is equal to this, which means in my Philip-Kev's equation, remember that I had the Philip-Kev's, this relationship, I am going to replace this part with output gap, which is what I do here. Then I get that this now, it's becoming your Okun's. So Okun's is showing you the relationship between the deviation in inflation is explained by deviation in output, right? The change in output. In chapter 7, we saw that the way the wage setters form their expectation have changed over time. Here we assume that inflation this year is the same as inflation last year. So I'm saying that pi E is equal to this. So we can rewrite Okun's law as follows: that minus that is equal to this. This means that when Y is greater than Yn, output gap is positive and inflation is increasing. So whenever this is greater than that, it means this change in inflation is actually going up, right? And the opposite is true. So the positive relation between output and the change in inflation is upward sloping. So the reason why this graph is upward sloping is because of this equation, how we get it, right? So the relationship shows that there's a positive relationship. This is on the y-axis, so if you increase y, these things then should increase as well. So that's why the PC curve is now upward sloping. So the positive relationship between output and that is upward sloping. Output is measured on the horizontal axis, and that is measured on the y-axis, right? So remember that at potential, when this is equal to this, you have that pi is equal to that the PC curve cross the horizontal axis at the point where this output is equal to potential output. This E could actually replace it with the N. It's nothing special. Dynamic and the median run equilibrium. So from figure 9.8, the central bank set the policy rate R is associated with the output Y. Then figure 9.8b show the level of output implied by a change in inflation equation. So we are talking about the change, not just a level. So remember that in this, on the y-axis, you are not only looking at inflation level, you are looking at the change in inflation. So you are saying, how does changes in output affect the change in inflation? So that is important as well. You need to remember that. But I will say if I say this is twicely important, you need to know that's a signal that you actually need to know that for your exam, right? Okay, so this means that economic is overheating. So whatever you have, that your output, your actual output which is being produced is greater than your potential, it means you have surpassed your potential. When you surpass your potential, if you increase if you try to stimulate your economics, the only thing you are going to get is inflation. I.e. at potential, if central bank, for example, increase money supply at potential, all that money translates is now too much money chasing too fewer goods, and that is what we call inflation. So this means that the economic is overheating, putting pressure on inflation. Thus, the economic is in the short run. So this scenario then happens when the economic is in the short run, and we need deviation, but we need a transmission mechanism back to y equal to ye, and this inflation being stable. So over time, if there is no changes in policy rate or any of the variable which affect the IS, if this is the case, y will continue being like that, and inflation will keep rising, right? And you will have maybe hyperinflation and stuff. But that's not what happened in real life. At some point, the policy rate will react to this phenomena of the increasing inflation. When the central bank will act, on increasing interest rate, so as to decrease output back to potential and contain inflation pressures. So central bank will intervene. So adjustment through a graph. So assume that starting point is A, and the central bank increase the policy rate. Over time, movement alongward. So if the central bank then starts increasing, so if you are at point A, where you are above potential, it means you need to go back to A. And to do that, you must increase interest rate. So you'll increase interest rate until A hyphen. Right, so in the graph below, as output decreases, so remember, as we go this way, our output is surely decreasing. The economic move downward along the PC curve from A to B. So this is what happened in the ISLM if you are going back to potential. What happened in the PC, you are moving now from this point to that point, right? So there is a decrease in what? There is a decrease in as output, as you go back there, your output is decreasing, and surely this thing as well, the change in inflation as well is decreasing until it becomes stable. So know that. Okay, so that is important. So when y is equal to that and r is equal to that, there is no longer inflationary pressure in the economic, and Rn is termed as a natural rate of interest rate, which is associated with natural rate of unemployment or natural rate of output, and that's what we call Wixolian rate of interest rate. This is not important. You don't have to remember the name. Just remember what it means. What it means. So in the short run, over the medium run, the economy will converge to a natural rate, level of output, and stable inflation. The interesting question is then, if the South Africa Reserve Bank want to achieve stable inflation and output, why does it not act promptly so medium run equilibrium is achieved without delays? So instead of us waiting until something happens later, if we know this is a case, why can't we just mitigate immediately? Unfortunately, the graphs are very simple, and in fact, there are plenty of lags in the economy which are not clear immediately. Later, you learn type of lags in the economy, such as recognition lags. It might take time for actually the policymakers to recognize that there is a problem, or execution lag. It might take very long time for the implementation of a policy in the to take effect in the economy. For example, now COVID-19, government is trying to give all these relief packages. Central bank is cutting interest rate, but the economy is still on the red. So it will take a long time for actually the full effect to be reflected in the economy. So it's not as easy as you think. So adjustment discussion continues. So it takes time for firms to adjust their investment decision as their investment spending decrease in response to increase in policy rate, leading demand to decrease, followed by a fall in output and income. It takes time for consumers as well to adjust to their decrease in income, and for firms to adjust to decrease in sales. So these are important things you need to know their implication, right? Okay. The fact that it takes time for output to return to potential output raises the issue about inflation. So during adjustment process, output is consistently above potential, and therefore inflation is consistently rising. That's when the economy reaches point A, inflation is rising, is higher than point A. So if you come back to this graph and look on the change in inflation, you are above it until you get here. So you are always positive until you fall back to here, right? So what does that mean then? If the central bank care about the level of inflation beside stable inflation, it might decide that it has not only to stabilize but also reduce inflation. To do this, it can increase the policy rate beyond RIN to generate a decrease in inflation until inflation is back to a level desired by the central bank. So the central bank can act to mitigate the impact. So in this case, where the central bank care about the level of inflation, the adjustment is more complex. For example, at point C, at which stage central banks start to decrease policy rate back to RIN, if South Africa Reserve Bank want to achieve the constant level of inflation over the medium run, then the initial boom must follow recession. So let me discuss this a little bit for you to follow. So what we are saying is it might be wise for the central bank to actually try to mitigate higher inflation, i.e. reduce the level of inflation. Now, when they want to do that, they actually increase the policy rate. But when they increase the policy rate because the economy was overheating, what happened is the economy might actually go further into recession. Instead of it going to full employment and full output potential, it actually fall into recession. So that's one of the possibilities. Right. Now, so above, we didn't actually, another thing we need to discuss is the expectation, how actually we view what government is doing or what the central bank is doing. Sometimes the central bank might change policy, but as it change policy, we just decide to, we might think if government is cutting taxes now, in the future, they are going to increase taxes. So we are not even going to change our consumption schedule. It's the same here. So let us think on the role of the expectation in inflation formation. So above discussion is based on the way people form their expectation and the specific form of the Philip curve. To see this, instead of assuming that expected inflation is given to last year inflation, assume instead that people think that inflation will be equal to some constant, irrespective of what inflation was last year. By making this assumption, this equation then become that. This means that positive output gap generate a higher level of inflation rather than an increase in inflation. So understand what we mean there. So if the economic is at point A in figure 9.2 with associated level of output, given that you are above potential, inflation is higher than expected. As the central bank increases the policy rate to decrease output to natural level, the economy move along the IS curve. So remember, when you change the policy rate is on the axis. So when you change it, is a movement along your IS curve. So when you are interpreting your answers in the exam, I need you to remember, if you are talking about the policy rate, that is a movement along the IS. Remember that. So when the economic is at point A hyphen, the policy rate is equal to RN and Y equal to YN, and inflation is back to the stable rate. How is this different from the past discussion? Here we return inflation to pi. There is no need in this case for the central bank to increase policy rate beyond RN for some time. So when there is expectation, when you introduce expectation, it means there will be no overheating. You are not going above RN. You can actually just go back to RN itself and not be above it, right? Then we have a thing called zero lower bound and debt crisis. So our previous discussion on the adjustment was too simplistic. If output is too high, the central bank increases the policy rate until Y equal to YN. This is, however, is too simple an assumption to make, and things can go wrong. Okay, so the reason for this is a combination of what? Zero lower bound and deflation. So zero lower bound is when the interest rate is too low to the extent that the central bank cannot what? The central bank cannot use interest rate as a tool to influence what? To influence the economy. So that is what does a zero lower bound mean? It means that your interest rate is the economic is insensitive to changes in interest rate. Deflation, on the other hand, is when actually prices the prices are decreasing, right? Like there's a decrease in prices. So we assume actually when you are recovering from overheating, there should be a fall in prices. But we really never experienced a fall in prices in real life. So that's one thing you need to keep in mind, that do you actually experience fall in prices when the economy is getting out of recession? Probably not. Now consider a case where the economy is in recession. So you have that scenario. At the current policy rate, y minus that is negative, which means inflation is doing what? Inflation is falling. So the adjustment mechanism here implies that while the economic recover from recession, the price level decreases, i.e. the economic experience deflation. That is not very realistic, right? If zero lower bound prevent monetary policy from increasing output back to potential, the result may be a deflation spiral. So that is one of the biggest problems when you have a zero lower bound interest rate. More deflation lead to higher real policy rate, and the higher policy rate in turn lead to lower output and more deflation. So deflation is it's like a scenario where we are waiting for prices to fall more for us to buy. So we just keep waiting, right? And what that does is it means the economy cannot recover, right? So understand the graphs in the thing. I'm not sure if we ask you to plot graphs. I don't think we ask you to plot graphs. It's going to be difficult for you to input a graph. In this case, the central bank should decrease the policy rate until output has increased back to its natural level. In terms of figure 9.3, it should decrease the policy rate from R down to Rn and Y until you go back to the medium run. If the economic is sufficiently depressed, the real policy rate needs to return output in the natural level may be negative. So the zero lower bound constraint may, however, make it impossible to achieve this negative real policy rate. Suppose that so remember that we said previously that interest rate cannot be negative. So that's what the zero lower bound means, which means you cannot do that. Suppose that initially inflation is zero. Because of the zero lower bound, lowest the central bank can decrease the nominal policy rate is zero, which combined with zero inflation imply a real policy rate of zero. So in the graph 9.8, the central bank can decrease that to zero, which is with the level of output Y. At Y, you see that your output is less than your potential, and this is still decreasing. Right, so this is, so I think, okay. So this is, can everyone see my slides? Hi there. Can everyone see my slides?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. I just want to make sure that we are all together. So as in 9 minutes, we'll take a break and then we come back because it's a bit longer, but we'll take a short break. So assume that the wage setters set price is equal to that. So I'm discussing figure 9.3 in the book. So if assume that wage setters assume that expected inflation is equal to previous inflation. So output less than that, which means this is decreasing. If inflation is equal to zero initially, it becomes negative. Zero inflation turn into deflation. In turn, this implies that even if the nominal interest rate remain equal to zero, the real policy rate increase, leading to even lower demanded output. Deflation and lower output feed on each other. So that's one scenario you need to remember. Lower out, but these are not complex stuff. Maybe it will come through MCQs and stuff. Lower output lead to more deflation, and more deflation lead to higher real interest rate and lower output. So remember the deflation spiral. Okay. Okay, summary of our discussion so far. So during the Great Depression of 1929 and 1933, inflation turned into larger and larger deflation, steadily increasing the real policy rate and decreasing spending and output until other measures were taken. Then the economic started turning around. The financial crisis of 2008 raises a similar concern. With policy rate down to zero in advanced economy, the worry was that, so remember the financial crisis that the European Union tried to lower interest rate as much as they can until it went to zero, but there was nothing happening. So they were scared that they could fall into a deflationary spiral. With policy rate down to zero in advanced economies, they worry that inflation will turn into negative and start a similar spiral. The fear did not materialize, but inflation decreased in some countries and turned to deflation. So that was not a big issue. Oh, so why didn't the 2008 financial crisis then result in deflationary spiral? That was because of how the inflation expectation were formulated. So inflation expectation were anchored, right? i.e., the PC relation took the form that and not this. Lower output led to lower inflation, and in some cases mild deflation, but not steadily larger deflation as has been the case during the Great Depression. So remember the difference. Okay, now I'm going to discuss fiscal consolidation. So the ISLM PC model allow us not only to look at the short-run effect of the effect, but also the medium-run effect of a shock. Suppose that the economic is at potential, point A in the graph. So you are at potential, and then the government want to reduce what? To reduce the deficit. Now to do that, they are going to increase taxes. So of course, taxes are on your IS curve. So your IS curve will shift to the left. At a given policy rate, output decrease from YN to Y, and inflation start decreasing. So if the economic was at full potential and government pursued deflation, deficit reduction, the economy will go into recession. But this is a short-term equilibrium. Remember chapter 5. Next, let us discuss what happened in the medium run. So as output is too low and inflation is decreasing, the central bank is likely to react and decrease the policy rate until output is back to potential. This takes place, the economic move down along the IS curve. Now, this is what I want you guys to remember. Remember that I talked about there was a shock of government trying to cut taxes, but the central bank as well counter it by decreasing the policy rate. When they decrease the policy rate, that's a movement along the IS. So the process continues until you go back to potential. Not the policy rate need to maintain that is now lower than before RN. In the medium run, the output go back to its initial position before fiscal policy consolidation, but taxes are higher and consumption is lower, but not at a lower as it was in the short run. So whenever you're asked to check medium run and short run, please, you need to specifically state what happened in the short run in terms of output and potential output and inflation, and explain as well what is not changing and what is changing. For example, in the medium run, what will change and what won't change. So remember that, that's very important. So when you're answering your question, specifically state that in the short run, this is what happened, in the medium run, this is what happened. That is important. We need you to do that. I insist, that is important. Okay. So interest rate is lower. So in the medium run, the output go back to its initial position before fiscal policy consolidation, but taxes are higher and consumption is lower, but not as lower as it was in the short run. Interest rate is lower, investment is higher than before, i.e. decrease in consumption is offset by an increase in investment. So demand is unchanged. So you see, I explained that what's happening to interest rate, what's happened to investment, what happened to consumption, and what happened to demand overall. Right, that's important. Whether I'm talking about oil prices or whether I'm talking about fiscal consolidation. This is totally different to what happened in the short run, which made fiscal policy consolidation look attractive. Although fiscal policy consolidation may decrease in investment in the short run, it increases investment in the medium run. So that contrast must be explained. The graphs are in your book. You need to know them, how they look, right? Okay, so these are just the graph explaining the adjustment mechanism in the fiscal policy consolidation. It seems fiscal policy consolidation can actually take place in the short run without decrease in output in the short run. All that is needed is a coordination between government and central bank. As fiscal policy consolidation take place, the central bank should decrease policy rate to maintain output at a natural level. This means that proper policy mix between monetary policy and fiscal policy can achieve the medium run equilibrium outcome in the short run. But sometimes the central bank might not be able to coordinate with the government due to zero lower bound, as discussed before, i.e. central bank have limited room for decreasing the policy rate. In the Eurozone, that was a problem. With nominal policy rate at zero in EU, monetary policy was unable to offset the adverse effect of fiscal consolidation. So remember the Greek went into went into crisis. I think now Italy and Ireland, they had an issue where they couldn't actually use their central bank to counter the economic crisis and to actually cut. Remember the austerity. The austerity made the European Union economic worse. Austerity measure merely mean controlling inflation, right? Cutting your deficit, right? So the result was a strong adverse effect of fiscal consolidation on output that would have not been the case had the ECB been the case. So I'm gonna stop here. We resume in the next 5 minutes. So I'm gonna send you a link and then we can resume in the next 5 minutes. Okay.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Ezekiel.
See you in 5 minutes.
Ezekiel, can you quickly add me onto the emailing list?
Please send me the email. Send me the email and I will add you there.
Okay, perfect. Mr. Email, it's